our first story that we actually reported on earlier, Azaan Madisia and her brother and co-accused Steven Mulundu were acquitted yesterday by High Court Judge Christie Liebenberg on the charges of murder. However, they were found guilty on charges obstructing the course of justice. The sentencing of the two accused is currently being deliberated. However, the acquittal of murder had a number of people, including the family of the deceased Shannon Wasserfall, in disbelief. Now, to make sense of this, we are joined by lawyer Henry Shimutwikeni for an analysis on the case. Good evening. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good evening.
You know, quite an interesting case this is. And of course, I think what's more interesting is rather the verdict of it. Quite unexpected. You know, maybe just give us a brief overview of the verdict on, on the Shannon Wasserfall case.
Yes, I think probably the outcome of the matter, which had tongues wagging, was the finding of not guilty on the charge of murder. But I think for one to understand the reasoning of Judge Liebenberg in reaching that particular finding, one must just briefly understand the facts which the court found to be reasonably possibly true. And very briefly, those facts were as follows. 10th of April, Ms. Wasserfall went missing, all right? Around about in October or so, the police, and she went missing, that was in Walvis Bay in Kwesabmund. Roundabout in October or so, the police received anonymous text messages which directed them to the particular location where the body was said to be possibly located. Roundabout in November of the same month, of the same year, which is 2020, Ms. Madisia, Ms. Madisia, who's accused one, was arrested and charged. And shortly after that, the second accused, who's her brother, Mr. Mulundu, was charged too. Now, another aspect of the facts which is important in order to answer that question is the fact that on that particular day of the 10th of April, 2020, what was reasonably possibly found to be the facts was that there was a social session which was being held in Kwesabmund at the house of the deceased, Ms. Wasserfall, together with, so it was Ms. Wasserfall, Ms. Madisia, together with the minor son of the deceased. Shortly after that, Ms. Wasserfall says, well, it is said that Ms. Wasserfall went somewhere. When she came back, there was an altercation between Ms. Wasserfall and Ms. Madisia, who's accused one. Right. Now, what the court found in terms of the facts that could be reasonably possibly true was that at some stage during the altercation, the deceased, Ms. Wasserfall, bit Ms. Madisia, and Ms. Madisia pushed, and there's emphasis on that, pushed Ms. Wasserfall. She fell over the bed. Ms. Wasserfall went then and felt for a pulse, and there was no pulse. It's important to understand those facts because what was Ms. Madisia together with Mr. Mulundu charged? They were charged with, number one, murder, number two, a robbery with aggravating circumstances, number three, obstructing the course of justice. Ms. Madisia had two additional charges, which is fraud and two counts of fraud. I think we'll park those for now. Now, when it comes to murder, and it's important to understand that Judge Liebenberg, in making his decision, was seized with the facts which were presented before him. One can say very well, particularly by, I think it was Isaacs and Klassen on behalf of on behalf of Legal Aid for accused 1 and 2, in that the state, which is the prosecution, represented by Advocate Muhongo, was tasked with showing the following, which is three things: that Ms. Madisia had her conduct, perhaps loosely speaking, caused the death or murder. The conduct was such that it falls within the ambit of murder. Number two, that the conduct was unlawful. Number three, that she had the intention. And number four, that there was causation, meaning that that particular conduct of pushing caused the death. So all of these have to be met in order for one to be successfully prosecuted for that particular crime of murder. So from the judgment, it becomes apparent that the facts before Judge Liebenberg were not sufficient enough to fulfill all of these elements. And there's a bit of emphasis placed on the intention And the intention is a state of mind, meaning that at the time when she pushed, which the court accepted was her conduct, was her intention to actually kill or murder the deceased. The court found no. And then one then comes to causation in terms of her conduct. In the conduct of her pushing, was it so that her conduct of pushing Ms. Wasserfall was such that it caused the death? An interesting finding in the judgment is that the cause of death, the actual cause of death, the facts before the court were not sufficient enough for the court to make a finding on the cause of death. So the finding was in essence that the cause of death is unknown. That's important to note. So yes.
But moving forward, and I think with the case, we do know that the guilty charges now. Talk to us about that, the charges that they were found guilty on. What do you think informed, this decision, rather?
Yes, in terms of, they were accused two, had, as we indicated, 3 charges. Right. It was murder, robbery with aggravating circumstances, correct, yes, and obstructing or defeating the cause of justice. Accused 1 had 2 additional charges which dealt with fraud. We'll park those for now. Okay. So she was found guilty of the charges of fraud. And in terms of obstructing the course of justice, which is perhaps important for today's discussion, both pled guilty to that. Okay. Yeah, they pled guilty to that, and the court confirmed basically their guilty plea. All right. And I'm sure we know what that entails. That entails, the facts. It stems from the facts which emanate from them disposing of the body. And
of course, we do know that the acquittal of this murder had Wasserfall's family and residents from where Wasserfall was from up in arms. But overall, what do you think is one to take away from this case?
When a court makes a particular decision, right, the court makes a decision based on the facts that are placed before it. So, having read and studied the judgment, the decision which was reached by Judge Liebenberg is a rational decision. It's a rational decision to make, given the facts that were placed before the court at the time. So I think that's important to note that whenever a court makes a decision, unless of course there's an inspection in loco or something where the court goes beyond what is placed before it, but a court makes a decision based on the evidence based on the evidence and the facts that are presented to it.
All right.
Yes.
Henry Shimutwikeni, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for giving us all the information.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
That was Henry Shimutwikeni, lawyer, giving us all, just giving us a judgment, and of course, just an explanation of what happened in the Wasserfall case. We are now moving on with more stories after a short break.